This is my intervention research presentation. I am at the Learning Academy in the 5th grade with Miss Willis, and my case study student, as you can see in these slides, he struggles with both fluency and reading comprehension. As we may know, fluency relates to the accuracy and speed at which someone reads. My case study student, Cody, reads very choppy. He appears to take a lot of time decoding, and so this takes him a lot longer to read. When it comes to his words per minute, he is probably at about a 1st grade level, and again, he is in 5th grade, so you can kind of see that he is a much slower reader. And then another factor would be reading comprehension. Because Cody has to take so long to decode his words, he lacks the fluency, and so his reading comprehension is also affected. Essentially, when he isn't reading fluently, it's going to kind of make him forget what exactly he was reading, just maybe a few words before that. So he is just going to kind of lose what exactly he was reading. And so these factors affect his reading progress because obviously if you can't read fluently and you can't comprehend what you're reading, there's really no point to read in a sense. So I think these would be great starting points for him. He has been at the Learning Academy since 2nd grade, so he has actually shown a good bit of improvement. But I really think he needs to start working on his timing for fluency, not necessarily just getting a certain timing down, but just working on struggling less in a sense, which I know is easier said than done, but that is my hope for starting with these interventions. So factors that impede literacy progress. What is literacy? Essentially, this is the ability of somebody to read and write, and there are several main factors that I included. With that, I feel that socioeconomic status, home environment, background knowledge, and student interest level are pretty big impeding factors with literacy. When it comes to socioeconomic status, this can affect a student. Maybe they don't have as many supplies readily available at home. They might not have books that they are able to read. And as well, the parents might not have that education, and so they might not be able to help their child very much, which is sad, but also it's a reality as well. The home environment, so that pretty much can go along with the socioeconomic status, just that lack of supplies and sometimes lack of support, not hearing that oral language like they need to. Background knowledge, if a student has background knowledge on whatever it is that they're reading or learning about, that a lot of times can help them comprehend what it is that they're learning about. So a lack thereof is going to greatly affect that student's literacy. And then student interest level, I feel that choice is a huge thing just all throughout learning. But when the student is reading something that might not be their favorite, their interest level is going to go down, and so their literacy is also going to go down. So next is acquisition, and there are 3 main things that I'm going to talk about with that. So there's language acquisition, cognitive acquisition, and also reading acquisition. So with language acquisition, that refers to a child's development in communication, whether that's speaking, listening, or writing. Children acquire language in different stages, and they are often influenced through interaction. Student to parent, or student to maybe a guardian or just older figure is absolutely great. Students need that socialization, and they need to hear that language spoken. Some impeding factors would be lack of exposure to oral language, which I just mentioned. I feel it's very important that students are just speaking very regularly and that they are kind of hearing that in the home as well. So a lot of times if students don't really hear that oral language in their home, then they might have a much lower oral language ability. And then another one would be word knowledge. So for word knowledge, if a student can't really recall a word, it makes it much more difficult for the student to identify the word and know its meaning. So word knowledge would be kind of like those sight words as well. The next would be the language acquisition stages. So those range from childhood to the older stages. So it's more from simple to complex. So the first stage is babbling, and that starts around 6 months, and then that's things more like mama, dada, very simple meanings. And then it goes to one word where meaning is slowly added to the words, and that starts around age 1. And then the next one would be 2 words, and that's where children use those more important words, so nouns and verbs, and there is word order, but grammar and syntax, so meaning, are lacking. And that would be for children around 1.5 to 2 years old. After that would be the multiple word stage, or the telegraphic stage. And this is where the child strings words together to form many sentences. So they're very likely to be fragments, but they will be more complete thoughts than the ones seen in the 2-word stage. And this is also where grammar and pronunciation start to arise. And these will be seen in students 2 to 5 years. So after childhood, you will see the elementary and intermediate, the middle, and the high language acquisition stages. And essentially, as I mentioned, these are getting more complex. So the children are using more complex sentences, grammar and syntax are incorporated. They're actually able to understand what they're doing. Listening, spelling, and writing comprehension are also addressed in these. The next acquisition stage is cognitive acquisition. This is where we learn to organize information, and it stems from schemas. So schemas are the basic units of knowledge that organize past experiences and help us understand new experiences. And these are just a large part of acquisition, or cognitive acquisition, excuse me. Because if you aren't able to really organize those thoughts and think of what happened in the past, what is happening right now, then it's hard to kind of understand what's going on for the future as well. Some impeding factors would be lack of development or disabilities. So if you have maybe dyslexia, autism, things of that nature, that's greatly going to affect your cognitive acquisition. Your brain might not necessarily be functioning the exact same as the average person's. That doesn't mean that they don't still have the same abilities as the average person. It just means that they are going to probably take some more probing, take more time to get there. And then another impeding factor would be lack of exposure to new information. So the point of the cognitive acquisition is to organize information in the brain. So if you aren't really exposed to new information readily, then there's no way for you to mentally process that information. So it's important to constantly be learning from your teachers, your peers, siblings, parents, pretty much any time, anywhere. There are cognitive stages. There are 4 of them. There is the sensory motor, which ranges from 0 to 2 years of age, and that is when they will develop knowledge through their senses. After that is the preoperational stage, and that age ranges from 2 to 7 years, and that's where you can see concrete thinking, and words and pictures are used to represent objects to help with understanding. After that would be concrete operational, and that is for children ages 7 to 11. And this is where thinking becomes more logical and organized, but it is still very concrete. So students really just have that one focus and they're not very abstract with it. And then in contrast would be formal operational, that's ages 12 and older, and that is where you can see this abstract thinking, and that's where students are able to use reasoning. So the last one would be reading acquisition, and that's gaining the skills needed to recognize and add meaning to written words. Some impeding factors would be disabilities. That's one that I already mentioned, but obviously things like dyslexia, dysgraphia, all of those can impact a student's disability or a student's ability to read as well. If somebody is autistic, they might, well, all of these students are very bright. They might just have a difficult time focusing or just understanding what is on that text. Another impeding factor would be access to books. So maybe your parent might not have books at home. If you're living with a guardian, they might not have those books as well if those can be very expensive and they just might not have those readily available to them. And so that can negatively affect a child's reading acquisition. And also, if the student isn't able to read, they typically aren't gaining that reading progress. And so then when they go to school, they're kind of more embarrassed to read, which is just kind of a whole negative cycle. So there are also reading acquisition stages, and there are 4 of those. The first one is emergent, and that's where students are able to form letter-sound relationships. The next one would be early, and children will predict words. They use visual cues and language patterns to help the child better understand what they are reading. Then it would be transitional, and students are able to figure out most words. They read at a pretty good pace, but they are not fully fluent yet. For fluent, that is where students are able to read accurately at a steady rate while also adding expression to reading. What have I learned? So on the previous slide, it just talked about reading fluently, and this is something, obviously, that I already mentioned that my student struggles with. He does not use any expression in his reading, which makes it very difficult for even me, who is following along what he's reading, to understand. Whenever there's dialogue, he doesn't really announce it. He often avoids things like punctuation marks, so even if there's an exclamation point, Cody just reads at a pretty monotonous tone, all very level. And so I'm hoping to work on things like repeated reading. I would also like to work on prosody, so obviously getting that whole change in expression. I've heard of something where you can essentially roll a die and the student will act excited or they'll act scared whenever they're reading whatever passage it is. So I think that might be a fun factor for him. As well, for reading comprehension, you know that he struggles a lot with decoding, but I think if he is able to maybe form reading comprehension questions, that could really help him. There was a intervention I saw, and the student is supposed to create questions, so they have to kind of go back and reflect on whatever it is that they were reading, and then create questions that are not just those surface level answers. It's kind of getting the student to dig deeper and actually gain that knowledge. And how does this help me with my future teaching? I feel that the Learning Academy has greatly helped me essentially just open my eyes to the fact that not every student is going to be average or above average. There are going to be a lot of those below average students. They might not have a disability like dyslexia, but they will still be lower in reading. And whether that is because they don't have access to books at home, whether they are not really speaking English, and not getting that English oral language at home. I think those are huge factors. And so I think something that I want to do no matter where I am, I would want to assess the students right away and see where their language, their language acquisition, but also just reading in general is, and then I would make interventions based on those. So for the technology that I have seen in this classroom, the smartboard is used every single day for Orton Gillingham. That is typically the only really activity that I do see while I'm there. So yes, we are doing the smartboard for things like visual drill, auditory drill, things of that nature. And then also iPads, those are more recent for our children in the classroom. We're using things like Read Naturally, Lexia, also some math games are available to the students, and I believe they're also getting to research and start doing PowerPoints with those, which is a great opportunity for them. So this next slide, this shows just some evidence of a running record that I have done with my student. This is actually the second one. So Cody is, again, he's a 5th grade student, and the first time I did the running record, I handed him a level 3 record, and he showed 26 miscues, which is quite a few, and that was pretty close to the frustration level. So I conversed with Dr. Powell, and we decided to try a level 2, and that went a lot better. He only missed 6. And a lot of those were, there were similar kind of things, or he flipped like the and he or his. So not major issues. I believe only one of those miscues changed the meaning of the passage. So that is good to see that he was improving with that 2nd grade level. But that being said, he is still quite low compared to where he should be. So I am hoping that these interventions with fluency and reading comprehension can really help. Again, he likes to decode, which is great, but I feel that it affects both his fluency because he's very choppy, and then also his reading comprehension. Again, he's taking so much time to read those words and sentences that he essentially just loses meaning from it. And this is my list of sources, and thank you guys for listening.